She didn't knock. She just stood at the gate, 7 months pregnant, wearing a black dress that still smelled like a funeral, and waited. Most people who came to Damián Reyes' estate came with gifts, with bribes, with carefully rehearsed explanations for why they deserved to live. She came with nothing. No appointment. No name dropped at the gate. No envelope slid under a door. Just a swollen belly, cracked lips, and eyes that had already seen the worst thing imaginable, and somehow hadn't broken. The guard radioed inside. Twice. Damián didn't look up from his desk. Send her away. 3 words. Cold as tile. Final as a verdict. But his 12-year-old daughter, Sophia, was standing at the upstairs window. And something about the way that woman stood, still, unbothered, like she had already made peace with being turned away, made Sophia's chest tighten in a way she couldn't name. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. Who is she, Papa? Damián still didn't look up, but his pen, for just 1/2 second, stopped moving. That pause, that one tiny pause, should have told her everything. Her name was Claire Bennett, 29 years old, former 3rd-grade teacher, widow for 6 weeks. Not the kind of woman who showed up at cartel estates. Not the kind of woman who knew what a cartel estate even looked like from the inside. Except she did now. She'd driven 4 hours from Phoenix with $43 in her wallet, a printed address on a torn paper bag, and a name she'd found folded inside her dead husband's sock drawer, written in handwriting that wasn't his. Damián Reyes. If something happens to me, find him. She hadn't wanted to come. She'd argued with herself the entire drive, talked herself out of it twice, then back into it once more when she felt the baby kick on the highway and realized she had nothing else. No family left. No savings. No explanation for why her husband's business accounts had been drained 72 hours before his death. She wasn't here for revenge. She was too tired for revenge. She was here because her husband had written a name, not a lawyer's name, not a police contact, not a pastor, but this name. And whatever that meant, it meant something. The guard had taken her ID, returned it without comment, radioed again. She stood in the sun and didn't move. Inside the estate, Damián Reyes sat behind a desk made of dark walnut wood and family silence. His office was the kind of room that absorbed sound. Thick rugs, stone walls, no decorations except one framed photograph turned face down on the credenza. He was 41, still sharp-jawed, still the kind of man whose stillness read as danger to anyone trained to notice such things. He had been told a pregnant American woman was at the gate. He had said to send her away. He had meant it. He returned to the quarterly report in front of him. But Sophia was already moving. She appeared in his doorway 12 minutes later, barefoot on the stone floor, her dark hair still twisted in a braid from school. She was 12, and she had her mother's eyes, which meant Damián could never fully look at her and never fully look away. There's a woman outside, she said. I know. She's pregnant. I know. She's been standing there for 20 minutes, Papa, in the sun. Sophia. His voice carried the particular weight of a man used to ending conversations with syllables alone. Sophia heard it. She had been hearing it her entire life. She understood intellectually what it meant. She didn't move. She looked scared, Sophia said quietly. But she's not showing it. I think that's the saddest part. Damián finally looked up, not at his daughter, at the turned-down photograph on the credenza. He held that gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then he set down his pen with the kind of careful precision that meant something was being contained, not resolved. Bring her to the east sitting room, he said. Water. Nothing else. Sophia's expression didn't change. She didn't smile. She simply nodded and left. Damián stood, walked to the window, and watched Claire Bennett being escorted across the courtyard below. She walked slowly, hands cradled beneath her belly, chin level. She didn't look up at the house with hunger or awe. She looked at it the way people look at a place they already know is going to cost them something. He watched until she disappeared through the side entrance. Then he turned back to his desk, picked up his phone, and dialed a number he hadn't called in 6 weeks. It rang 4 times. No answer. He hung up, sat down, stared at nothing. She shouldn't be here, he thought. But she was. And the pen never moved again. The east sitting room was beautiful in the way that expensive, unloved things are beautiful. Claire sat on the edge of a cream-colored sofa and held her glass of water with both hands, because her hands needed something to do. She had been in the room for 11 minutes. No one had come. No one had spoken. She could hear, very faintly, a clock ticking somewhere behind the walls. She almost laughed. Almost. I drove 4 hours to sit in a haunted-looking room and drink water. But then the door opened, and he walked in, and the almost laugh evaporated completely. Damián Reyes was not what she'd expected. She hadn't been sure what to expect. Something loud, something gold-chained, something performing power the way men who needed to perform it always did. What walked in was a man in a gray linen shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, who sat down in the chair across from her with the quiet authority of someone settling into the only chair in the world that belonged to him. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't offer anything. He simply looked at her. She looked back. My husband's name was Marcus Bennett, she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. He died 6 weeks ago. Car accident, the police said. Except Marcus didn't drink, didn't speed, and had just taken out a $100,000 life insurance policy 4 months prior, which has since been flagged under a clause I can't afford a lawyer to explain. Damián said nothing. I found your name, she continued. In his things. He wrote, if something happens, find this man. She reached into her bag and placed the torn paper on the table between them. Damián looked at it. His face did not change. Not a twitch. Not a blink. Not the micro-expression of a man surprised. Which meant one of two things. Either the name on that paper meant nothing to him, or it meant everything, and he had spent a long time learning how to look like it meant nothing. What do you want from me? He asked. The question was clean. No quorums, no hostility. The voice of a man who asked only questions he already knew the shape of. I want to understand why my husband trusted you with his last instruction, Claire said. And I want to know if whatever you were to him, you're willing to be anything at all to his child. Silence. It expanded in the room like something with physical weight. Damián's eyes dropped, briefly and only briefly, to her stomach, then back to her face. You came here alone? Yes. You drove from Phoenix? Yes. You didn't tell anyone where you were going? She paused. No. Something moved behind his eyes. She couldn't name it. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't calculation. It was something older than both, something that looked, just for a half second, almost like guilt. Then it was gone. He stood, buttoned the single button on his cuff that had come loose. Walk to the window. You'll stay tonight, he said. The house has rooms. I didn't ask to. I know what you asked. He turned. This is what I'm offering. She studied him. You knew him, she said. Not a question. Marcus. You knew him. Damián looked at her for a long moment. Get some rest, Mrs. Bennett, he said. You've been driving too long in the heat. He left. The clock behind the wall kept ticking. Claire set down her water glass, pressed her palm flat against her belly, and whispered, more to herself than anyone, what did you get us into? Sophia found her before dinner. Claire was standing on the small balcony off her guest room, watching the sun come apart over the desert in shades of copper and ash, when she heard small feet on stone and turned to find a 12-year-old girl in the doorway, holding a plate of sliced mango. The kitchen said you didn't eat, Sophia said. I wasn't hungry. You should eat anyway. She nodded at the belly. For her. Claire blinked. Her. Sophia tilted her head. I don't know. I just feel like it's a her. Claire took the mango. She didn't know why. Maybe because it was the first genuinely kind thing that had happened to her in 6 weeks, and kindness from a child was a harder thing to refuse than almost anything else. What's your name? Claire asked. Sophia. Sophia. She smiled. A small one, careful like something she wasn't sure she still had permission to do. I'm Claire. I know. Sophia sat down on the balcony step, entirely uninvited and entirely unbothered by that. Papa had you looked up already. Claire stopped chewing. He does that with everyone, Sophia said, not unkindly. Don't take it personally. He looked at my math tutor too. And he fired him. She paused. But that was more about the math. Claire almost smiled for real that time. They sat in comfortable-ish silence for a moment. The kind you can only find with children and very old people who haven't yet learned that silence between strangers is supposed to be awkward. Then Sophia said, quietly, "Did you know my father before?" "No, he's acting strange." "How so?" Sophia considered this with the gravity of someone who had been observing the same person her entire life and had learned to read the margins. "He canceled his calls tonight. He never cancels calls. And he ate dinner alone in his office, which he only does when something is bothering him that he doesn't want me to see on his face." Claire said nothing. "He's not a bad man," Sophia said then, and there was something painfully earnest in the way she said it, like a defense she'd practiced but never had to use out loud before. "He's complicated. My mother used to say he carries too many debts. I didn't understand that when I was little. I'm starting to." The word debts landed differently than Sophia intended, or maybe exactly as intended. Claire studied the girl, this strange, sharp, quietly watchful child who had been born into a world of controlled silence and had somehow retained the ability to ask direct questions, and felt something cold and clarifying move through her. She doesn't know, Claire thought. She doesn't know what her father is, but she's starting to ask the right questions. "Your father," Claire said carefully. "Did he ever mention Marcus?" "My husband." Sophia's brow furrowed. "No. Then, should he have?" The desert had gone dark now. Stars were beginning to press through. "I don't know," Claire said honestly. Sophia stood, brushed mango off her hands, and looked at Claire with an expression that was too old for her face and too young for the weight behind it. "I think you're going to change something here," she said simply. "I don't know what, but the house feels different already." She walked back inside. Claire sat alone in the dark, one hand on her belly, the copper-stained sky folding into black above her. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she felt something other than desperate. She felt watched, not by Damián, by something older. Like the house itself was waiting to see what she'd do next. At 11:47 p.m., Claire couldn't sleep. She tried. The bed was the most comfortable thing she'd touched in 2 months. The room was cool and quiet, and her body ached in the deep cellular way of third trimester exhaustion. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's handwriting on that torn paper bag. And beneath it, like a watermark she couldn't burn out, a question she'd been avoiding since Phoenix. Why will my husband know a cartel boss? Not a business contact. Not a lawyer. Not a fixer. A name written in crisis ink. If something happens, which meant Marcus had known, on some level, that something might. Which meant the accident wasn't an accident to Marcus either, even before it happened. She got up, wrapped herself in the robe the house had provided, and walked into the hallway. She wasn't looking for anything. She was just walking. The house at night was a different architecture. The lights were low, amber wall sconces that made everything feel like the inside of a memory. She followed the hallway to a junction, turned left out of instinct, and stopped when she heard a voice. Low. Male. Speaking in Spanish, too fast for her high school vocabulary to catch completely. But she caught 3 words. El accidente. The accident. And then, lo siento. I'm sorry. She stood very still in the hallway. The voice was Damián's. Coming from behind a closed door she hadn't noticed before. No handle on the outside. No light visible beneath it. Whoever he was speaking to wasn't responding, which meant a phone call. Which meant he was apologizing to someone on a phone at midnight about an accident. Her heart did something ugly and set in her chest. She didn't move for a full minute. Then she turned around, walked back to her room, sat on the edge of the bed, and thought very clearly and very carefully about what she was going to do with that. She was still sitting there when morning came. She didn't bring it up at breakfast. Damián appeared at the kitchen table at precisely 7 a.m., dressed already, coffee in hand. Sophia was eating cereal and reading something on tablet. The domestic scene was so ordinary that it felt almost violent in contrast to everything underneath it. Did you sleep? Damián asked. Yes, Claire said. The lie sat between them, entirely invisible. I'd like to stay a few more days, she said. If the offer stands. He looked at her over his coffee. It stands. I want to understand what my husband was involved in, she continued, keeping her voice steady, neutral, almost conversational. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not recording this. I'm a pregnant woman with $43 and a dead husband, and the only lead I have is your name written in his handwriting. Damián set down his cup. Marcus Bennett worked for me, he said. The room went very quiet. Sophia looked up from her tablet. Logistics, Damián continued. Clean work. No weapons, no product. He managed routing for legitimate supply lines we use as cover. Was it voluntary? Claire asked. Initially. That word. Initially. She let it hang. Didn't push. Just nodded slowly, like she was filing it. What changed? She asked. Damián looked at Sophia. A signal. Subtle, parental. Sophia picked up her bowl and left without being asked. When the door swung shut, Damián leaned forward, forearms on the table, and looked at Claire with an expression she hadn't seen on him yet. Not cold, not guarded. Tired. Mrs. Bennett, he said. There are things about your husband's death that I am not yet prepared to tell you. But you know them. Yes. And you will tell me. He looked at her for a long moment. Eventually, it wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a refusal either. And for now, with $43 and no other door to knock on, eventually was going to have to be enough. She found a photograph by accident. 3 days into her stay, Sophia had taken it upon herself to give Claire a tour of the estate. Not the formal, this is the dining room kind, but the real kind. The this is where I hide when Papa's in a meeting kind. The this room has the best light at 4 p.m. kind. The kind of tour only children give, where every room is annotated by feeling rather than function. They ended up in the gallery hallway, a long corridor lined with framed photographs, mostly landscape, mostly Mexico, empty roads, mountain passes, one coastline at sunset that looked like it had been taken from inside grief. But near the end of the hall, behind a slightly crooked frame of the Oaxacan hills, Claire noticed a second frame had been removed and replaced with a rectangle of slightly less faded wall paint. What was here? She asked. Sophia glanced at it. Papa moved it. When? About 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. Claire kept her expression even. What was it a photo of? Sophia hesitated. Not the hesitation of someone hiding something, but of someone remembering something they'd never been asked to articulate. A man. I didn't know him. He and Papa were shaking hands somewhere. Looked like a warehouse or something. Papa's face was different in it. Different how? Younger, but not in age. Sophia paused, searching, like he hadn't decided yet what kind of man he was going to be. Claire didn't respond to that. But that night, after Sophia was asleep, she went back to the gallery hallway alone. She stood in front of the faded rectangle on the wall for a long time. A man, a handshake, a warehouse. 6 weeks ago, right around the time Marcus died. She turned the thought over carefully, like something with potential to cut. What if the photograph wasn't removed out of guilt? What if it was removed as protection? The two looked identical from the outside, but they came from different places in a person's interior. Guilt was emotional. Protection was strategic. And Damián Reyes, she was learning, did very little that was purely emotional. She walked back to her room. On the way, she passed his office door. The light was on underneath it. It was after midnight. She knocked. A pause. Then, yes. She opened the door. He was at his desk, glasses on. She hadn't seen the glasses before, and the domesticity of them was briefly, disarmingly human, reviewing something on a laptop. He looked up and removed the glasses in the same motion, like she'd caught him in something private. The photograph, she said, the one you removed from the gallery, was the man in it with you, Marcus? The room temperature didn't change, but something did. No, Damián said. Who was it? He held her gaze. A man who made a decision I should have stopped, he said, and didn't. She waited. He didn't continue. Damián. It was the first time she'd used his name. It changed the texture of the room slightly. Not intimate, but real. I am 7 months pregnant in a house I drove to because my dead husband left me a note. I'm not your enemy. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a threat. She paused. I'm the woman who is going to have to explain to a child someday why her father is gone. I deserve to know the shape of the truth, even if I don't get all of it. The glasses sat on the desk between them. He looked at them. Then sit down. She sat. He closed the laptop. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Damián Reyes opened a door he'd been keeping sealed for 6 weeks. just a crack, just an inch, and let something out. Marcus came to me 3 years ago, Damián said. His voice was level. The glasses were still on the desk between them. He hadn't looked at her once since she'd sat down. He wasn't recruited. He came voluntarily. He had a debt, not financial, not to me, a debt to a man I had recently removed from a position of power. A man who had been hurting people under my umbrella without my knowledge. Claire listened. Her hands were in her lap. Still, Marcus had information that helped me identify the problem. He gave it freely. I gave him protection in return, legitimate protection, paper trail, documented employment. He worked logistics, cleanly, effectively. For 2.5 years, nothing happened. He paused. Then something happened. What? She asked. He found something he wasn't supposed to find. Damián finally looked at her. In a shipment routing he was managing. Something that connected back to the man I'd removed. Who, it turned out, had not been fully removed. What did Marcus do with it? He came to me, which was the right thing to do. He stopped. And then, 2 days later, he went somewhere else with it. To someone he thought he could trust outside my organization. Who? A federal contact. The word landed like a stone in still water. He was talking to the FBI? Claire said. A single agent. Off book. Not a formal arrangement. Damián's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. But it was seen by the wrong people. And those people... He stopped. Claire felt her body go very cold. Those people reported it to me, Damián said, framed as a betrayal. The silence after that sentence was the loudest silence she'd ever sat inside. And you believe them, she said. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. You gave the order. Still nothing. But his hands, flat on the desk, perfectly still, pressed down slightly. The kind of pressure a man applies when he's keeping himself from doing something he can't afford to do. You had my husband killed, she said. Quiet. No shake. No scream. Just a sentence placed between them like something permanent. You had him killed, and then you found out you were wrong. 3 days after. 3 days. She looked at him. She wanted to find rage. She was searching for it, going through every room inside herself. And she found grief, and she found a terrible, suffocating understanding, and she found fear, and she found something that would become rage eventually. She was sure of that. But right now all she found was the image of Marcus writing that name on a torn paper bag and thinking, if something happens. He had known, not the how or when, but he had known, and he had pointed her here, not to an FBI contact, not to a journalist, not to a safe house. Here, to the man who killed him. Why? Why would he send me to you? She asked. Damián was quiet for a long time. Because, he finally said, I think Marcus understood that I would find out the truth, and that when I did, I would carry it. He looked at her. He trusted me to protect what he left behind. Even after, the clock ticked behind the wall. That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard, Claire said softly, or the most broken. Damián didn't answer, but his eyes, just once, just briefly, went to her stomach. And Claire suddenly understood something that shifted every wall of this story she'd been building in her head. Marcus hadn't just sent her here for protection. He'd sent her here because he knew what Damián didn't. She didn't tell him that night. She went back to her room, lay down on top of the sheets fully dressed, and held the information inside her chest like a live thing. Careful, breathless, aware that once she released it, everything would change shape permanently. Marcus had known about the baby. Of course he had. She told him at 8 weeks, on a Sunday morning in their kitchen in Phoenix, and he had cried, quietly, privately, the way Marcus did everything, and held her for a long time without saying anything, and then said, everything is going to be different now. She thought he meant different good. What if he meant different complicated? She thought about the timeline. 8 weeks pregnant when she told him. He died at her 14th week. That was 6 weeks of Marcus knowing. 6 weeks of Marcus going to work for Damián, managing logistics, finding something in a shipment, making contact with an FBI agent, and writing a name on a paper bag. 6 weeks of Marcus building a contingency. If something happens, find him. Not run. Not hide. Not call this lawyer or this number or this safe house. Find a man who might kill me. Because Marcus had known something about Damián Reyes that Claire was only beginning to understand. That underneath the controlled stillness, underneath the cartel architecture and the tactical silence, there was a man who paid his debts, who, once he understood the truth, would carry the weight of it without being asked. Marcus hadn't sent her to Damián for protection. He'd sent her to hold Damián accountable in the only way that couldn't be erased. A child. She found him in the courtyard the next morning. He was standing at the edge of the fountain, a stone basin with desert flowers growing around it that Sophia had planted 2 years ago. He had his back to her, coffee in hand, watching the water. She walked up beside him and stood there for a moment. "I'm having a girl," she said. He turned slightly. Marcus knew, she continued. He knew about her before everything. He knew, and he still went to that agent anyway, and he still wrote your name, which means he made a decision. What decision? He decided that the most dangerous man he knew was also the most responsible one. She looked at him. He trusted you to be better than what you did to him. He trusted you to see a child and not be able to walk away from it. Damián's jaw worked once. That's an enormous amount of faith to have in someone who killed him, yes. She said it evenly. I know. The fountain moved between them. I don't want your guilt, she said. I don't want money. I don't want to be a kept woman in your guest room, and I don't want Sophia growing up wondering who the pregnant lady in the hallway was. Then what do you want? She looked at him directly. I want you to be honest with me from this moment forward. About everything. Because my daughter's going to grow up, and she's going to ask questions, and I need to know the shape of the world she's being born into. He stared at her. And one more thing, she added quieter. What? Stop sleeping 2 hours a night. I can hear you walk in the hallways. It isn't going to undo anything. Something moved in his face then, something so fast she almost missed it. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. Like a man who had been walking a dark room alone for 6 weeks and had just heard, for the first time, the sound of someone else's footsteps. Sophia asked the question on a Thursday. She asked it over lunch, quietly, without preamble, the way she did everything. While Damián was reading something on his phone and Claire was pushing rice around a plate and pretending she had an appetite. Papa. Did you know Claire's husband? The phone stayed up. A half second too long. Yes, he said. Ow, he worked for me. Sophia processed this. She moved her fork to the other side of her plate and back. Is that why she's here? Because something happened to him while he worked for you. Damián set the phone down. He looked at his daughter, and Claire watched him. Watched this man who had built an entire architecture of silence around himself, arrive at a crossroads he couldn't engineer his way out of. He could lie, easily, cleanly, in a way Sophia would accept. He'd done it before. Not cruelly, not maliciously, but in the careful way that parents lie to children when the truth has teeth. He could say, it's complicated, mi amor. He could say, not at the table. He could say nothing at all and let the moment pass. But Sophia was looking at him with her mother's eyes, and Claire was watching. Something happened while he worked for me, Damián said. Yes, and I didn't handle it correctly. Sophia was quiet. What does that mean? She asked. It means I made a decision based on incomplete information, and someone was hurt because of it. Claire's husband. Yes. The room was very still. Sophia looked at Claire, not with accusation, with something more uncomfortable, with the careful, unguarded empathy of a child who hadn't yet learned that some truths are too expensive to hold. I'm sorry, Sophia said to her. Simply, directly. Thank you, Claire said. Sophia looked back at her father. Are you going to fix it? You can't fix everything, Sophia. I know. Her voice was patient in the way that only people who have had to be very patient at a very young age can manage. But are you going to try? Damián stared at his daughter for a long moment. This was the morally uncomfortable moment. Not because anyone was being monstrous, but because everyone at this table was being devastatingly human. A man who had ordered a death being held accountable by his 12-year-old child in the simplest language possible. No courtroom, no confrontation. Just a girl with a fork and her mother's eyes asking if her father was going to try. There was no clean answer. If he said yes, he was making a promise to a child over a grief he caused. If he said no, he was something else entirely. Yes, he said quietly. Sophia nodded once, picked up her fork, and went back to eating. Claire looked down at her own plate. This child, she thought, is going to be terrifying when she grows up. And then underneath that, my daughter is going to need someone like her. And underneath that, the thought she didn't let surface all the way because it was too soon and too complicated and too entangled with everything wrong. And maybe she's going to have her. She pressed her palm to her belly under the table, felt the kick, and decided that Marcus, wherever he was, had known exactly what he was doing when he sent her here. That night, the rains came. Late summer desert storms, the kind that arrived without warning and turned the courtyard fountain into a roar. Claire stood at the window in the dark and watched lightning crack over the mountains to the east, counting seconds between flash and thunder the way her mother had taught her when she was small. 1, 2, 3. Not close yet, but coming. She heard the door at the end of the hall. Footsteps, then silence, then a knock. Light, not urgent. The knock of someone who wasn't sure they had the right to knock. She opened the door. Damián stood in the hallway in a plain white shirt. No jacket, no armor of any kind. He looked, in this light, in this rain, like a man who had finally put something down that had been very heavy. I looked at the routing files, he said. Marcus's last 3 months. The contact he made with the agent, it was clean. No leaks. Nothing that endangered the organization. Then why was he reported as a threat? Because the man who reported him wanted Marcus gone. Wanted the file Marcus found buried. He paused. That man is no longer a problem. She absorbed this. The FBI contact, she said. The agent Marcus reached out to. Is he safe? Damián said. And yes, the rain came harder. I want to tell you something, he said. And I need you to understand, I'm not saying it to. It's not strategy. It's not to make you feel better. It's just a fact. Say it. When I was told Marcus had turned, I didn't want to believe it. His voice was very quiet. I delayed the order for 48 hours. I told myself I was gathering more information. But the truth is, I already knew the information. I was just. He stopped. Looking for a reason not to, Claire finished. He looked at her. But you did anyway, she said. Yes. What? Silence. The rain. Lightning again over the eastern mountains. Because I decided that the architecture was more important than the individual, he said. Because that is the decision I have always made, and it has kept 1,000 people safe and killed a few that it should not have. He looked at his hands briefly, and I live with that. It is the weight I carry. Sophia, said her mother, told her you carry too many debts. She was right. The hallway was narrow. They were closer than intended, not by design, but by the contraction of space that rain and night and honesty create between people. I'm not going to forgive you tonight, Claire said. Maybe not ever. I don't know yet. I'm not asking you to. I know. She looked at him. But I'm still here. And my daughter is still coming. And whatever this is, she gestured between them, between the hallway and the house and all of it. We're going to have to find a way to make it into something that doesn't poison her. He nodded. Slow. There's something else, he said. I know, she said. Tell me tomorrow. He looked at her. Something open in his face, just for a moment, something she couldn't categorize because she'd never seen it on him before. Good night, Claire. Good night, Damián. She closed the door, stood with her back against it in the dark. The rain came down. She didn't cry. She thought she might. She waited for it. But what came instead was something quieter and more dangerous than tears. Clarity. The something else was a folder. Damián placed on the kitchen table the next morning without ceremony, thick, manila, taped closed with the kind of deliberate precision that meant it had been sealed and unsealed several times. He sat down across from her, poured coffee for them both. The first time he'd done that, the first gesture of ordinary care, and said nothing. She opened it. Inside, financial records, routing documents, and beneath those, a single sealed envelope marked with a legal notation she recognized because Marcus had worked briefly as a paralegal before she met him. Paternity acknowledgement, filed pre-mortem. She looked up. Damián was watching his coffee. What is this? She said. Marcus filed it 6 weeks before his death, Damián said. With my attorney, under seal, pending certain events. Her hands were completely still on the folder. Who is named? Damián was quiet for a long time. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, Sophia was somewhere in the garden, singing something tuneless and private. His name is on it, Damián said. Obviously, as father. He paused. But there is a secondary filing, a contingency document. Which names? Don't, Claire said. He stopped. She closed her eyes, opened them, looked at the sealed envelope. He planned this, she said. All of it. The contingency document is not binding, Damián said carefully. It carries no legal force. It was filed as a letter, an expression of, what does it say? He was quiet. Damián, it asks me, he said quietly, to consider the child as the kind of responsibility I wouldn't walk away from. The room was very still. In his words, Damián continued. He wrote, you know better than anyone that some things cannot be undone, but some things can be carried forward. I'm asking you to carry this forward. Not for me. Not for you. For her. Claire didn't move. A dead man had written a letter to the man who would kill him, asking him to be something good for the child he'd never meet. The audacity of it, the grief of it, the staggering, impossible love of it. She pressed both hands to her belly and felt. Right then, right on cue, her daughter moved. Hard, decisive, like someone establishing a presence. She's going to be impossible, Claire said softly to no one and everyone. And then, for the first time in 6 weeks, she laughed. Brief, fractured, wet the edges, but real. Damián looked at her. She saw it then. What she hadn't been able to name before. In the hallway last night, in the East sitting room, in every moment where he chose the harder, more honest thing when the easier one was available. Marcus had not been wrong about him. That was maybe the most complicated truth of all. I'll read it, she said. The letter. When I'm ready. He nodded. She stood, picked up her coffee, moved toward the garden door, then stopped. The man who reported Marcus, she said without turning. The one who framed him. You said he's no longer a problem. Yes, but he had people. Contact. People who believed the frame. Silence. She turned. Damián, does anyone else know I'm here? He looked at her with an expression that was completely calm, completely still, the most dangerous kind of calm. Not yet, he said. Yet. The garden door was open. Sophia was still singing outside. The desert morning was bright and clear and entirely beautiful. And somewhere beyond the gate, something that hadn't finished was beginning to move. She named her Mercy. Born 6 weeks later, in the guest room she'd never quite vacated, with Sophia holding her hand because no one else was there to hold it, and Damián standing in the doorway with the expression of a man witnessing something he didn't have a language for yet. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Dark eyes. A grip that immediately found Claire's finger and did not let go. She came out decided. The midwife said, this one knows what she wants. Claire looked across the room at Damián. He was looking at Mercy the way people look at things that cost them something. Not with ownership, not with guilt, but with the careful, irreversible attention of a man who had just understood, for the first time, the full weight of what carry this forward meant. He didn't cross the room. He didn't reach for the child. He just stood in the doorway. And then Sophia, brilliant, impossible, 12-year-old Sophia, looked at her father and said, she looks like someone who's going to ask you hard questions when she's older. Damián looked at Claire. I know, he said. And for the first time in their entire strange, grief-soaked, truth-complicated story, Claire believed him. Part 2 is already in motion, because the people who knew Marcus are about to learn where his daughter was born, and they are not coming with condolences. If you think this story was about love, you missed the real war. Part 2 drops next. Don't let the algorithm bury it.